Hello, Lottie. Thank you very much for
Hello.
joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's good to get to know you. We haven't met before, so I'm interested to hear the answer to my questions. The
Mhm.
first one of which is a little bit about your journey into Quakers. So I wonder if you can just tell us, when did you first come across Quakers and your journey into it, and then what's that been like? Why have you stayed? What do you get out of it?
Sure, sure. Well, I don't remember ever not being aware of Quakers. My mum is quite heavily involved in the Quakers, and she took me and my younger brother to meeting from pretty much as soon as we were old enough to be taken out. I think we started off going to Slough meeting, and then moved to Jordan's because we'd moved house, and that was closer. And I'd say we went pretty regularly until we were teenagers, and then I went quite sporadically. My brother wasn't so interested, so he didn't, but I sort of kept going every so often. And then at university, I wanted to keep going, so I went to the one in Cambridge, the Jesus Lane meeting for a bit. And yeah, and I then spent 10 years working for the Church of England, which meant I could never get to meeting. So I so I had sort of 10-year break, and then the moment I stopped doing that, I went straight back to my local meeting, who made me very welcome, and I've been going ever since, which is nice.
Gosh, I mean, that's probably one of the most smooth journeys through Quakers that I've come across, really. I mean,
Yeah.
I suppose I'm interested. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it was like being in Quakers as a child and as a young adult or teenager moving
Yeah.
into?
Yeah, we were lucky at Jordan's in particular. Well, at Slough as well, actually. There was a very good children's group when we were small. So I mean, I was very little when we went to the Slough meeting. We moved when I was 6, so I just remember there being lots of games and lots of colouring, and then when we did go to Jordan's, it was somebody else running the children's group, and we actually had enough children that there were activities for the sort of under fives and then the over fives. And I remember doing all sorts of interesting things. The thing that I remember best was making a board game about Pilgrim's Progress, which I can remember everything that we drew and which bits I did and which bits my brother did and which bits the other people did. I think it's probably still there. So it was quite fun. And we would always go into the meeting for the last 5 or 10 minutes. And my main memory of that is struggling not to get the giggles. Especially if my brother was there because we'd just set each other off, which was quite fun. But nobody ever minded, which was nice. We never got
Yeah.
told off, which I think might have happened had we gone to um, certain churches or certain other religious organizations. I think I don't think people ever mind. I think perhaps because we were only in for the last 10 minutes, but yeah, people never seemed to mind if we were loud, which was nice.
No. So Pilgrim's Progress, so what you mean? Is that John Bunyan? Is that like
That's right.
I mean, that's pretty orthodox Christian stuff. I mean, you're not that ancient as me, kind of going back into. So I'm really intrigued that they were still using, that kind of book. I mean,
I
there's
think it was because there was so much imagery and so much interesting stuff to talk about. I think theologically, it wasn't a case of, this is what Christianity is. It was sort of it was told to us as this is a story about a man called Christian, and these are the things that happened to him, and perhaps we could think about what this means and what that means, and so on. But it wasn't ever sort of I don't think it was meant to frighten us or anything like that. I think it was just meant to get us thinking. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, it was
Well,
good.
I mean, I suppose one of the things that I worry about is that Quakers in Britain today have kind of lost quite a bit of the Christian tradition and don't
Mm,
really even talk about it very much. Um, and that worries me a little bit. I suppose the reason why, I mean, I see it as a kind of it's a 2,000 year tradition which has stood human beings in fairly good stead and as a kind of a way of living our lives. So I think we lose it at our peril, really, as a
mm.
society, you see. And part of the thing that I'm interested in is like, how do we provide context and situations and learning for young people and children in what you might call moral formation, you know?
Yeah,
And I just
absolutely.
don't, I mean, I'm not involved with the children's meetings myself. So I've never heard recently, I've been involved 20 years. I've been
Mm.
a Quaker for 20 years. It wouldn't have occurred to me that there's been something like Pilgrim's Progress being used. Do you think
Mm.
that kind of thing still is used?
Um, well, not at my local meeting. I mean, my local meeting has a very active children's group, but they are all. I think the oldest one who comes is 6, so so they aren't doing any sort of heavy literature there at the moment. It's more collages and glue and colouring, which is great. But no, I'm not sure what happens in other children's meetings. It'd be interesting to find out more.
Well, I
I
just
did.
wonder. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I did realize sort of going to university aged 18, meeting a lot of people from lots of different Christian backgrounds and realizing how little of the Bible I actually knew, which was quite a wake-up call. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
And what did you do about that?
Well, I joined the chapel choir at my college and had Bible read at me 3 times a week. So now I know it a bit better, which is quite nice. And I mean, I still go to our local Anglican church as well. Our children's meeting is only once a month. So the other Sundays we go to a very nice Anglican church. My husband's Anglican, so we're trying to get the kids involved in both sides of things,
Yeah.
which is interesting for them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because I mean, is that something that you've obviously got that in your own life, that kind
Mm,
of breadth
mm,
across a religious tradition, if you like, both for yourself and for your children.
mm.
If people are only going to Quakers, do you feel there's some loss to them in terms of their religious education?
I suppose it depends what they're looking for in terms of their religious education. I think there certainly isn't a huge amount of emphasis on the Bible, I would say, either in adult meeting or children's meeting. But I suppose I haven't been to every meeting in the UK. I don't know
No,
what
well,
it's like everywhere else. So
you can only
yeah.
talk from your own experience.
Mm,
But I just wonder if, I don't want to overstate it, but it feels to me like there's a real reluctance to focus on the Bible.
mm.
And I mean, am I overstating it to say there's even a,
No, I think there is, and I don't think it's unique to Quakers either. I think there are several branches of Christianity where they're sort of almost apologetic about the Bible, and just sometimes it's with good reason. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that is very uncomfortable. It doesn't sit well with modern society, modern morals and ethics, and there are bits of it that I read and I think, oh, I don't quite like. Don't think that's right. I don't think that's what God meant. But who am I to say what it means or doesn't mean? So yes, I think it is true that we don't pay a huge amount of attention to scripture in Quakerism, but I don't necessarily think it's unique to Quakerism either. So um,
no? I mean, would you say that there's even an antipathy? Is that?
yeah, I think there probably is in parts. I think the fact that I've so rarely heard any Bible quoted at meeting is that speaks volumes really. So
Mm.
yeah.
You see, I'm just appalled by that. I mean, I suppose I'm too old and I'm too opinionated and I just think that we're a fairly young tradition, a
Mm.
few hundred years old, and I just think it's getting a bit kind of above our station, if you like, if we're throwing out
Yes, I see your
tradition.
point. I suppose there's also a lot of people who come to meeting who would consider themselves Quaker, but not necessarily consider themselves Christian. And I think perhaps part of it is respect for those people and their beliefs. But I think it is important to acknowledge that Quakerism did grow out of a Christian tradition. It is a broadly Christian faith, and that's certainly how I identify when I think about it. So,
Mm.
but yeah, I think there's I think our excessive tolerance is sometimes problematic, isn't
Well,
it?
I think so, yes. I mean, excessive tolerance is probably something I'd like to come back to you
Mhm.
over the whole hour because I'm sure I mean, that's to me one of my biggest kind of bugbears at the moment. And Christianity is one of them. So I think you just said, you were talking about your university years and you actually went to meeting throughout
Yeah.
that period as well.
Mm.
So you didn't drift away then. I suppose there's a classic drifting away at that period.
Yes, and it was funny because I think before I went, I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't thought that, oh, I'm going to keep going to Quaker because I'm definitely a Quaker and I definitely want to do this. I think what was quite interesting was I was going to study music. I did study music, and I graduated with a degree in music. And I was desperate to be in the chapel choir, and I managed to sort of scrape in to the very last remaining place. And at the first social, I met two other people in the choir who were Quakers, which was absolutely extraordinary because there aren't very many of us. So to have three of us within a choir of, I mean, I think there were 24 in the choir, so it was an eighth of the choir were Quakers. And I think we all decided, oh, should we go and check out the local meeting, see what it's like? And then I think we all kept going actually, all, not necessarily every week, but we would all keep going, and it was quite nice to have that space from the hectic university life. It was the one part of the week where I could sit and be with my thoughts and be still and actually have a chance to process all the stuff that I was learning, not just in my studies, but also through the chapel, being introduced to the scripture and the music and all of that side of things. So I think that was why I kind of hung on to it. And perhaps it was partly this is something that I know, this is something that's familiar, because going to university is a huge change. You're suddenly
Mm.
away from your parents and learning in a completely different way. And this was the one thing that hadn't changed. It didn't matter that the building was different, the people was different, the whole idea of communal silent worship was the same. And that was something that I felt very comfortable in and very familiar with. And I used to bang on about it to my friends. I think all of my friends came with me at least once. And I even managed to get the college chaplain to come along once in his dog collar. He loved it.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, I mean, lots of my, religious friends from other traditions enjoy Quaker meeting actually. You
Mm.
say it was familiar. Would you agree that it's kind of a spiritual home, and that throughout the country, then we have, or even the world, we have this network of community which we can just plug straight into.
I mean, I personally feel like that very much. Yes. I think I go to Quaker meeting and I know broadly what to expect. I know that people are going to make me welcome. I know that um, I'm going to have some time to sit and listen to some thoughts. And if I'm lucky, there might be some interesting ministry. Well, any ministry is interesting. So, and I think it's definitely a comfort zone for me. But I'm aware that I mean, my husband does enjoy coming, but he doesn't find it as comfortable as I do.
Mm.
Silence is not his comfortable place. He likes to be directed in worship and have a sort of common thing that everybody is doing together. I think the individualized nature of Quaker meeting is harder for some people to stomach, but yes, it certainly feels very comfortable for me. So
Yeah, yeah, and I'm really interested in that because people who are not used to it, you know, sometimes in some meetings, people will walk in and we'll give them a little book or something and they'll go and sit down and they're really just thrown in at the deep end, aren't they? And and,
yes.
and part of me isn't very satisfied with that either.
No.
I just wish that we did something more to guide people in who are perhaps fidgeting or uncomfortable or in distress of some kind, and
Mm,
silence just compounds that. Um,
yes.
and I don't feel we always do that. How did all of your friends? You've had some experience by the sound.
Yes. I mean,
Mhm.
I always prime my friends before we go. This is what's likely to happen. Some people might speak. Sometimes nobody speaks, and you have to kind of be all right with that. I think the first meeting I took my husband to was a half-hour meeting. It was a Thursday lunchtime, and that was quite nice because half an hour. Most people can manage half an hour without getting too fidgety. So I think that's quite a good way of doing things. But I wonder if we maybe, I mean, if you go to a church you've never been to before, someone gives you an order of service and helps you find a seat. And that's not really how we can't really make that work in meeting in the format we have it at the moment. But perhaps we could produce something, some kind of literature, a leaflet or something saying, "Is this your first meeting?" Maybe there already is one, I don't know. But if this is your first meeting, this is a bit about what you might see
Yeah.
and hear and experience. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I think there is a your first time in meeting kind of little leaflet or something.
okay. Hmm.
Um, I suppose I'm used to kind of some more guided approaches, like programmed meetings. I don't know if you've ever been abroad
No, I've heard
before.
of them, but I've never experienced one. I think they're quite big in America, aren't
Mm.
they? Rather than
Mm.
over here. I've never been to one myself.
No, no,
Mm.
and I've seen them online. You can watch things nowadays, and I've seen the programmed way. And I just think I'd like to see a bit more, perhaps, of traveling ministers from there. I know they come from Africa and from the States and things. I know they come for
Mm.
yearly meeting and do sessions, and I
Okay.
wish we could get a lot more of them over.
Yeah,
And
would be
even I've
interesting.
always liked this idea of twinning, a meeting here with a meeting over there, and trying to
Yes.
exchange ideas a bit. You
Mm.
know,
That
otherwise
would be
things
very
tend to go
interesting.
a bit
Yeah.
stale if we're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So did any
Yeah.
of your friends who came, did they go again, or do you think?
Yeah, a few of them came more than once. I particularly, I've had a couple of friends who've actually taken holy orders and become priests, and they were particularly interested in coming more than once. I think, it's another sort of aspect to the spirituality of Christianity, I suppose. So they wanted to explore that. And then, yeah, I think some of them have, and certainly since we started children's meeting, I think a few people have come who might not necessarily otherwise have come because the childcare is there. They've now got that that freedom to come if they want to. So that's quite nice. So yeah, I mean, I think I would have made the effort to go anyway, but perhaps not as regularly as I do at the moment. It's just so much easier if I can bring the children with me. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, of
Mm.
course. So tell me about why what you hope for with your children coming to meeting. What is it that you hope that they get from it?
I think what I really hope is that they just have some insight into my beliefs and why I have them and why it's important to me. I don't necessarily hope that they are going to become Quakers themselves. I very much hope they will carve out their own spiritual path and find their own religion that or not or lack thereof that suits them. And my mum is a Quaker, my dad is an atheist, my brother is an atheist. So it's not particularly important to me that we all follow the same path. But it was important to me that they were exposed to the faith that I grew up in and the faith that I still have. And yeah, so I was really pleased when we were able to set up the children's meeting so that they could just start to get a feel for what it's about. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking whether you have do you in the home have kind of spiritual practices that you also do with your children or
Um, my children are 4 and 2, so um, we're limited in what we can
right,
explore, really. We
very
did go
young?
through a phase of doing bedtime prayers, but the 4-year-old just got so silly with them, we had to stop. So we might reintroduce that when she's older.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't pray aloud, so it feels a bit strange for me, but my husband's much more comfortable with that, so he tended to do it with her. But I mean, we have an advent calendar. That's probably as far as we're going
Yeah.
at the moment.
I've got one here actually.
Excellent. Yes, yeah, we've got them for both the girls, which is nice. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think we do rely on Quaker meeting and on our church as well to sort of do the spiritual nourishment for us. I think we could probably make more of an effort at home, to think
Oh,
about that. But yeah.
yeah, that's all right. So tell me about you went back about your choir in your university. You chose the chapel choir. I mean, I
Mm.
presume there was a few other choirs that you could have gone to. Why did you?
Yes. Well, I went to Cambridge, and that was very much the done thing, especially if you're a music student. That was where you got the best musical education. You got free singing lessons. You got a bit of money off your college bill. So there were a lot of incentives to join. And I think if there had been another kind of choir that offered the same incentives, I don't know that I would particularly want to choose the chapel choir over it, if there was something else that offered the same opportunities. But it was basically it was 3 times a week, singing in chapel in a really good choir. So I thought, well, of course I want to do that. That sounds
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
So that was why I chose it, really, because it's what everybody does and it's a great opportunity.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I
Um,
mean, I'm not a great singer myself, but I am Welsh, so I have
ah,
sung in
yes.
choirs. And are you involved in that church college choir competition, or the I don't know if it's a competition as such, but it's a gathering. I sang
Mhm.
that a few times, and it was a wonderful experience.
Oh, lovely.
Do you know what I'm referring to?
Are the Eisteddfods and things like that, or is
No,
that more
no, no,
solo stuff? Okay.
no, no. There's a church colleges and universities choir gathering, and all of the
Oh, right.
yeah, all the college
Oh,
choirs, um, church founded, I
oh,
suppose. So I
wow.
used to work in a Catholic founded
Hmm.
university, so it was just amazing, and we sang all over kind of York Minster and.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
It's a cathedral, and so
Oh,
I do get
wow.
a sense of the kinds of things you'd have been singing, Bach and
Yeah. Yeah.
Wagner, maybe
Yeah.
things like that, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a nice thing to do, and certainly sort of gave me another insight into theology and faith, and sort of experiencing it through music, because Quakers don't really do that at all. So you might get the odd person who sings in meeting. They tend to be quite odd people, if I'm allowed to say that. You have to be quite brave, I think, to sing in meeting.
I
Um,
know.
and there, and
Once,
there are Quaker song activities as well, but they tend to happen outside the worship. So. Yeah, so it was nice to have it be part of something more religious for me. I think that was quite interesting.
yeah, and that's what I've
Mm.
always found. I mean, and many Quakers think the same. I think that lots of us are either musical or singing in choirs, and it's good.
Mm.
There's something different that it's providing. Do you sometimes wish that we did more music within Quakers?
Personally, no, but I think that's because music is my profession, and I don't really want to be at work while I'm in the act of worship. I was talking to my husband about this the other day, because we met in the professional church choir scene, and for a long time that was how both of us accessed church. It was the only way we accessed church. He wasn't Anglican when I met him. He wasn't anything. So and then we stopped. He started singing in a choir locally. And then that choir folded, so he started going to church instead. And he said it's so much easier to concentrate when I don't have a job to do. I can actually focus on the liturgy and the theology and so on. And that's exactly how I feel. I think if somebody started singing in meeting, it would be very nice, but my brain would be going, oh, and now they've gone up to this note, and that's the part of their voice they're using, and I'd go straight into singing teacher mode, and I just can't really help myself with it. So I personally don't think it would add anything for me. Um, but others may feel differently, and there's certainly ways of making music that aren't quite so obtrusive. There's a wonderful moment at the end of a Swedish film about a choir where they all start humming and improvising these chords together. And that, I think, is probably the closest that music gets to the ambience of meeting. So I think I wouldn't mind if we all started doing that, but I think that's very unlikely to happen. So,
Well,
yeah.
if you led it,
Well,
if
maybe.
you did a workshop on that, at the early
Maybe.
meeting, that's how these things
Maybe.
develop, isn't it?
People are frightened to improvise, though. I mean, I'm always in awe of anybody who stands up to minister, because I think it takes such conviction and bravery from the individual to stand up and share what their mind is telling them to share. And I think singing is that extra level of vulnerability that people don't often feel very comfortable accessing. But
Yeah.
maybe one day we could get
So you
something like that
don't
going.
minister yourself?
Oh no, I do, but I have to be really sure that I want to do it.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if everybody feels like that, but I have to think about what I'm gonna. Well, I don't plan it, I don't write it down or anything, but I have to be sure that I'm making sense before I stand up and say anything. So I don't minister often, but when I do, it's because I can't not share what I'm going to say, rather than I'm just going to stand up and talk for the hell of it. And I think most people are like that. I've certainly never heard a ministry when I've thought, what are they talking about? That it's always made sense to me what people are saying. So yes, I think it does take a certain amount of conviction and sort of what's the word? Surety of what you're saying to stand up for
Mm.
minister. So yeah.
So where do you think it comes from then? I mean, you use the word worship, it's meeting for worship.
Mm.
Are you worshipping? If so, what are you worshipping when you minister? What's your language around that? How do you describe what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting question. And I think the answer will very much depend on the day that I'm in meeting and how I'm feeling and what else is going on. And sometimes I will go into meeting and I won't have a single sort of thought that I would consider worshipful because my head is so busy with other things. But other days I can go in and feel like I've got a real direct connection with the light and feel, that I'm really getting something from it. But I mean, I would never go to meeting and think I hadn't got something out of being there. But I think sometimes I get more of a spiritual experience than other times. So yeah, I mean, I'll go in and I'll maybe set myself a task to think of some things I'm grateful for and give thanks for that, or maybe think about asking for guidance on how I can help somebody or help with a situation. Um, but most of the time I come in and I'm just like, I've got the kids in the other room. I'm just going to sit and be quiet for a little bit. Um, so I don't always have the same sense of purpose going in that I might otherwise. But yeah,
Well, we do what we can, don't we? And
exactly. Yes.
if you keep turning up regularly, then actually that's it. Just keep turning
Yes,
up.
that's it. Yeah, yeah, that's how I feel as well. So, yeah, and that's what I say to anybody who's worried they've come because what I did have with a lot of my friends is I'll say, did you find that interesting? They're like, yeah, it was really interesting. I don't know if I did it right. And I sort of say there is no right. You come and you experience this in the way that makes most sense to you. Even if it feels like it makes no sense whatsoever. It's okay just to be there
Hmm.
and be in the presence of others who are trying to do the same thing. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
And do you get a sense that Quaker meeting is helping you develop spiritually? And is that even something that you think about or are aiming for? Or.
Yeah, it is something I give thought to, and I definitely think Quaker meeting is helpful in that regard. I think it's probably the most helpful thing I do in that regard. Just because I have the silence and the space there. Well, it's not always silent, but I certainly have the space there to focus on whatever needs focusing on, and quite a lot of the time that is something spiritual, and so I'm very grateful for the space and the stillness that I get when I'm there. I think it definitely helps me develop spiritually. It certainly gives me space to think about difficult questions. And like you were saying about the Bible, I do sometimes give tricky passages of the Bible thought when I'm in meeting and think, how do I reconcile this part of the Bible with my identity as a Christian and the wider world and how they'll perceive me and this piece of scripture and so on. So I haven't come up with any answers, but it's nice to think about it and challenge myself, I think. So yeah.
So you do identify as a Christian then?
Yeah.
You say that because I wonder how many other Quakers in your meeting also think they're Christian or even
Mm,
talk about these things. It's not
mm.
something that I think people are very open about or talkative about.
No, I've certainly never had a conversation with anybody at meeting about that, except I have a friend who comes, and she also goes to the same church that we go to. So we already know that there is a sort of Anglican element to our worship as well. So I think there's no awkwardness in talking about it. I know she goes to church, she knows I go to church. She's confirmed I'm not. I have no wish to be, but we can talk about these things and not be embarrassed or not find it difficult. And there was another family who were coming for a while, and Mum was raised Catholic, so we could talk to her about feeling, having a Christian identity as well. But it's something I don't think it's something I would chat about in the coffee queue. I don't think I would say to somebody, "So, are you a Christian Quaker, or do you identify another way?" Or maybe I should. I don't know. It's not an offensive question. Perhaps I should just just
Well,
find out.
yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Hmm.
That that going for tea and coffee afterwards. I sometimes think that people rush from the deep stillness and then phew, into these kind of notices which are all busy and then
Yes.
tea and coffee, and it goes from the very profound to the superficial very
It's 0 to 60, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting, I think. I think that's where the organ voluntary in a traditional church service has its place. As everybody is processing out, you've got that music. And some people will get up and start to move, but a lot of people will stay and just listen, and that will be the ending for them. That's what brings them back into the real world. And I think that's one place where the COV have maybe got it right. They've got a bit of a smoother exit out of the profundity. But yes, maybe that's something that we could do differently. I always do find notices a bit jarring. It's sort of, suddenly, oh, there's a fundraiser and there's a concert and there's and so and so's doing this and so and so's doing that. And it's like that's great. And of course I want to know about all that, but it's quite a shock after
yeah.
after the stillness and the silence. So yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because not many people seem to agree with me that it's jarring. That's the words that I use,
Mm.
and it's a bit of a shock. And I've been really glad of this new thing of afterward. I don't know if you have that in your meeting, but afterward is that period where you can say something that hasn't been said in ministry. Do you
Oh,
have that?
right. No, we don't. It sounds interesting.
Ah, right. Well, that's a fairly common thing now, which I don't know, over the last few years. So it's a kind of a period, and the elders just decide when it stops. But that idea of
Sure.
maybe something you didn't quite, feel was ministry, but this is your chance to say
Hmm.
it now. And it means that it's
Okay.
slightly more like perhaps worship sharing. There's slightly more
Hmm.
encouragement, um,
Hmm.
perhaps less of a barrier for people, you know.
Sure.
It's not
Yeah.
it's not quite the high bar of God speaking through you. So then you think, oh, right, well, I could
No.
chip in this. And you just get to know each
Hmm.
other a bit more, but it's
That
still
sounds
being held
lovely.
in silence.
Hmm.
Yeah.
No, I
So
like that idea. I think
you've
that's
learned
really
you've
good.
learned something
Um,
that there is actually
I have.
there is actually a practice
That's
that we
great.
use commonly. Most meetings that I go to now use afterward. And I think it is partly for that reason to prevent that
Hmm.
shock entry into kind of bustling out the door and getting tea.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that sounds great.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's think about Quakers in general then. So you've got an outsider perspective as well, and you go to other churches, so you're kind of familiar with the landscape. I'm just
Hmm.
wondering what do you make of the culture of how we do things? Because there's a lot of talk at the moment about um, making sure we're open and inclusive and
Hmm.
diverse. And I mean, where this idea came from for these videos was the Future of Quakerism conference that I went to about a month or so ago.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, sat next to your mum and got talking about
Hmm.
these things. And we were thinking about well, we're down to 10,000 people, which some
Hmm.
people seem to think we're falling off a cliff and this is a terrible thing. And I thought, 10,000 people. I
Hmm.
mean, that's plenty.
Yeah, that's
That's
quite a
plenty for
lot.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but we were talking a lot about the future and what does it mean and how do we, make sure we continue to be attractive to the next generation and so on. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I've always wondered why more people aren't involved in Quakers. Certainly, when I describe it to people who haven't heard of it, a lot of people say, "Oh, it sounds really, really welcoming, really inclusive, really tolerant." And I don't know why. I don't know why we're not more attractive, honestly. But I don't really know how to tackle that. I don't think we're because we're not terribly pushy with our faith. We're not particularly evangelical as a denomination, I suppose. Um, and I think, the idea of inflicting your beliefs on other people is something that most Quakers really wouldn't be on board with at all. So, and I think perhaps we are just a bit too polite as well. Like we were saying about not feeling like we can ask each other if we're Christians. I mean, I think that's sort of says a lot about how we perhaps um, convey our faith to other people as well. But yes, I'm not sure how that's going to change. I feel like people find their way into Quakerism and a lot do stay, which is fantastic. And people do tend to, stay for a long time, a lot of the time as well. You said you've been a Quaker for 20 years, and I've just kept coming back to it when my life has allowed me to, which has been nice. But yeah, I think perhaps just people don't know very much about it a lot of the time. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was thinking then about, young friends. Were you involved in that kind of organization as you were growing up?
Not really. I wasn't involved in anything nationally. I never went to yearly meeting or anything. I didn't. My mum didn't take us. I think she
Mm.
had enough to do
Well,
when
yeah,
she was there without us being
yeah.
there. And I never felt like I was missing out particularly. I didn't really. I was going to our local one was enough for me. And I did meet a few people at university who were much more heavily involved in that side of things. But I don't know. I think I never had the time or the energy to take on
Well, there's
anything
only so
new.
much.
So there
There's
is only so much you can do. You're absolutely right, and yeah, and I'm aware that young friends organisations exist. I don't know very much about them at all. So, but I'm really glad they do exist, and
well, that's right.
hopefully they will continue to exist and flourish and do amazing things. So, yeah.
So can I pick up on what you just said about you used the word polite, and we talked earlier about kind of excessive tolerance. So
Mhm.
I suppose that chimes with something that I think. I mean, I'm not English, I'm Welsh, right? And I don't know how
Mhm.
relevant that is, but I do find Quakers are excessively polite and nice and tolerant, of things that really don't need to be tolerated. They can just have a boundary and say, no, that's not
Yeah.
right, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
do you get any, does that resonate with you at all? When you
I
say
think it
polite,
does. Well, I think tolerance and boundaries are not mutually exclusive things. I think you can be tolerant of something and still say, this is not working for me, this is not working for the meeting for worship. How can we, I mean, I think what we would always do is how can we help and how can we all make this work? How can we respect each other's boundaries and limitations and I think a lot of the time people say, well, the answer is to educate yourselves or to do more to support XYZ because they have it harder than you. And that's not always the answer. I think, we all have our own battles, and it's okay to say, I wish I could help more, but we physically can't, or we haven't got the resources, or that just doesn't sit right with me. I think it's okay to say that and still be a tolerant person. It's it's hard to know really, but
but what are you
yeah.
thinking about then when you talk about this, that boundaries are needed? What is an example of the kind of thing you're talking about?
Well, I think for instance, with our children's meeting, I think if they were in the whole hour, it would be horrendous. I think there would be a lot of ministry from 2-year-olds that wouldn't make any sense. People who come to worship in silence and stillness aren't necessarily going to get the experience they've come for. It might not make them not want to come again. I think the boundary that we have of they spend the first 50 minutes in another room doing age appropriate activities, and then they come in and they share the worship experience with us for the last 10 minutes. That's not only a boundary that the adults want to set, that is a boundary that the children need. It wouldn't be fair to have them in there the whole time. It's not appropriate for them, and it's not fair on them to expect them to behave and sit quietly, and or even, if you stick them in front of a screen, that's not great either. I'd much rather they were off doing something that's actually going to benefit them. So yes, I think that's one thing where I mean, it does take a certain amount of tolerance to welcome children into your meeting in the first place. You have to have somebody who's prepared to look after them, get all the DBS checks in place and all the, write down all the allergies that they have and all of these things. But, but I think that's the kind of tolerance that is right to give. I don't think tolerating children in an entire meeting is something that should be expected of the adults in a meeting,
Mm.
personally. And I think most people would agree with me
Mm.
there. I think that's why we have children's meetings and that separate space for them and meeting them where they're at, which is
Yeah.
nice. So yeah.
So how do you feel supported as a young parent then in your Quaker, and of course the two little Quakers that you're bringing along. I mean,
Well, I think the fact that the first time I mentioned it to my meeting, I just had my first daughter, and it was lockdown, so nothing was really happening anyway. And I used to go to meeting on Zoom, and I'd bring her with me, which was fine because I could just turn my microphone off or the camera off or whatever we needed to do. And I mentioned to them then, when we come back to face meeting, do you think we could start a children's group? I've got a few friends who are interested. It would be lovely if we could do something. And their first response was, yes, and we don't want you to run it because we want you to be able to go to meeting. And I thought that's brilliant because I get the sense that at a lot of churches, in particular, it's the parents who end up running everything. And then
mm,
what's the point? Because, the parents want their children to experience worship, but they're not getting to do any worship themselves because they're running an activity. So we've got a little team of lovely ladies, and we've had the odd gentleman as well, and they have a great time looking after the kids, and once a month I think is absolutely fine at the moment.
I
So
see.
it'd be nice to get to weekly eventually, but I think that's a way off down the line, and once a month is more than a lot of meetings have. So
Mm,
I feel very much like our meeting wants the children there and it wants them to be part of it and so on. So yeah, and people seem genuinely happy to have them there most of the time. And
oh,
anybody who isn't rude enough to say so. So
yeah,
I
I'm sure.
think it's absolutely fine. So yeah.
I mean, you sounds like as babies are born, one of those happened in COVID for you, which is a bit different. But
Mm.
I'm just wondering, I remember a friend of mine saying I think he had two or three children. And one of the things he said was, we don't have any kind of ritual around welcoming a baby into meeting.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, we put both my girls have been in the announcer for Bedford Meeting, that's the esteemed publication. So so that was I think that was how I felt we marked their arrival, especially for my first, because nobody was at meeting. So it was nice to be able to say and actually I think at the end of the first Zoom I brought her to somebody acknowledged her at the end and said it's lovely to welcome baby Heidi to this
Yeah,
meeting
yeah.
and I think I don't know if anybody announced my second when I wasn't there because obviously I wasn't up to going to meeting for a little while after having her. I would imagine somebody probably did because I did let them know, and they do tend to pass on nice news and sad news as well. We always hear when somebody dies, so I would hope we would hear when somebody's born. But yes, I'm expecting number three in January, so I'll find out this time.
Well, you see, I've
Yeah.
been ever since he mentioned that to me, and that was a good 10 years ago he mentioned that to me. I've been thinking about that every time because every now and then there is somebody, and we've just had somebody in my meeting, the mother brings in the baby for the first time,
Mm,
and everyone's so delighted, having been through the whole, you know, pregnancy and thinking, right, the baby's
mm,
well, thank goodness, and when will we meet this
yeah.
child? And
Mm,
then they come to meeting and they babble away in the corner. And,
mm.
just a few months ago, we had the most wonderful meeting with this baby babbling in the corner. And I think we felt that we'd been there through the whole thing, and we were
Lovely.
just so glad he
Yeah.
was healthy and happy and to
Mm,
hear the
mm.
sounds of him in
Yeah.
this meeting.
Yeah.
But it's made me think, well, how do we mark that? And I wonder if you know how like a Quaker wedding certificate. I don't know if you've seen them or whether you had a Quaker wedding yourself,
I
but
didn't
there's
know.
have you seen
Mm,
what I mean? Do
I
you know what I
haven't.
mean? The marriage certificate.
No, I haven't seen one. So-
Well, try and you ask. That's certainly something to ask in your meeting.
Okay. I will.
Because there's I mean there's some people who do proper calligraphy as well, so they're a beautiful document. But the
Mm.
idea is there's a form of words that you've used in your vows, and that's put in the middle with the two
Mm.
names, and then
Hmm.
everybody signs it.
Oh, lovely.
So the whole meeting sign it, and there's that kind of ritual,
Mm.
which I just think, something like that, for example, for a new baby
That would be lovely. Yeah, I
just
think.
to say, first time in meeting this date, this is the baby's
Mm.
name, and then everybody
Mm.
signs it. It's just, you know, and I just think there's just some things like that that
Yeah, it wouldn't be terribly difficult to organise, so I think that
it's
would
the
be a lovely
idea,
thing
you
to do.
see, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's a lovely
It's the
idea. Yeah,
thought of it more than anything.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so in terms of the culture, then we were talking about how welcoming Quakers are. I
Hmm.
mean, do you feel that there are any barriers in particular? Do you think there are some types of people who are tentative about joining and wouldn't consider coming to us because of
Um, yes, probably. I think there are certainly people for whom any religious organization is something to be approached with caution, and perhaps they're worried about. I think a lot of people approaching a new religion are worried about it changing them in some way that is perhaps less than positive. The effect it's going to have on them as a person and their own values and morals. I think with Quakers specifically. I don't know if it is just the idea that people find silence quite intimidating if they're not used to it. But I think we do our best to welcome people. There's always somebody on the door to say hello and
yeah,
and to make sure everybody knows where they're going and where the loos are and so on. So yeah, I think we do our best. I think it's a tricky one to welcome people into if they don't know what to expect, or even if they think they know what to expect and are
yeah,
surprised by what the actual reality is. So, but I think probably most religions have that. What we don't have is the the beautiful music and the stained glass and all of the things that people that were originally designed to bring people into church. The whole idea behind stained glass was that when your priest was droning on in Latin, you had something to look at that meant something. So, and obviously we don't need that in Quakerism because we don't tend to drone on in Latin, and we tend to make sense when we when we speak. But yeah, it's I think a lot of the sort of external beauty of a church service. There's a lot to see, there's a lot to hear, and there's a lot to take in. Is that's something we don't have in Quakerism, and for me personally, I don't need it, but perhaps some people feel that they do or feel like they should want it or so on. I think it's quite a difficult thing to reconcile yourself to, especially if you've grown up in another faith, and you've been told this is how we do things, and Quakerism is just so different. I don't really know anything else like it. I think the Buddhists are probably the closest, but again, it's a very different culture around Buddhist worship, and yeah, I think it's I think we're just very unusual in some ways. So, yeah.
and I always describe Quakerism, if somebody asks me, as a spiritual practice and a spiritual
Mm,
community, because of course we don't believe all the same things, and we don't tell
yeah.
people what to believe. But it's certainly a
Mm,
way of doing things together that we think will help people develop a spiritual inner life. Um, but I mean, I am very aware that not everybody finds that easy to access and or
no.
a big barrier then to come in to for the first time. And
Mm,
part of that is this sense that we're very middle class. We're very
yeah.
educated and polite and nice and middle class, and
Mm,
we have certain ways of doing things, which
mm,
if that's familiar to you, then that's great. But if it's
mm.
not familiar to you, it's quite I don't know, niche.
Yeah, yeah. This might be my 4-year-old memory failing me, but the first meeting I remember going to, Slough, seemed very, very diverse to me as a 4-year-old. There were a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, and a lot of people in homosexual relationships or or even less usual combinations of and I think. when we then moved to Jordan's, that was much more white middle class, as you say. But I think because my first meeting had been so diverse, I don't think it really registered until I was a bit older that we are quite uniform
Yes.
as an organization.
Mm.
I don't know how different that is to other religions and other denominations. I don't know how diverse other other places are. But yes, I think you're right. There probably is a an element of that. We are quite white and quite middle class, but we're not trying to be. I think,
Well,
you
that's the
know.
point, isn't it? I mean, I think we don't expect the Gurdwara to be, sorry that they have so many Sikhs of Asian
No, that's true.
origin
Yeah.
in them, or we don't have, we don't expect, I think, other churches to be thinking that way. So why do we think that of ourselves? I just
Mm,
feel this sense of self-criticism around diversity about a lot on ethnic grounds, which,
mm,
I'm sure is a very reasonable hope, but
mm.
I don't quite know what we can do about it,
No, beyond
proactively.
saying everybody is welcome and,
Mm,
please do come. I mean, I think I would feel very self-conscious, as you say, going into a Sikh Gurdwara and perhaps being the only white person
mm,
there. I mean, I don't think it would bother me particularly, but I think I would be conscious of it. And I think if you are the only Asian or black person coming into a room of white people, perhaps you're conscious of it as well. I don't know. I would never presume to speak for somebody of a different ethnic origin, but I think there, and particularly with British history as well, we've got all this awful reputation over the centuries of just not being very nice to people who don't look like us. And I think there is still this apology that we feel we need to make. And yes, of course we do need to make it. But I don't necessarily think that we need to apologize for being who we are now. In the same way that we need to atone for slavery and all the other awful things that have gone on in the past. It's yeah, I think it is very easy to pile on guilt when it's not necessary. And I
yeah.
think sometimes that can even detract from the guilt when it is necessary, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's
do you think
tricky.
there are things that we should feel guilty for or about as a Quaker community?
I think the Quakers have less to feel guilty about than most. We did help with the abolition of slavery. Then again, there were Quakers who had slaves. That we weren't uniform. There were Quakers who voted against the abolition of slavery. So, as with any community, that there will be opposing views. I don't personally feel the need to apologise for the Quakers who voted against Labour. I just feel the need to apologise for them as people who didn't make a very good choice. So yes, I don't know that we need to blame Quakerism particularly for things but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we do. I'm not sure.
Well, that certainly seems to be the way that we're talking to at the moment as a church. We seem to
Mm,
be moving down the road of reparations, for example, and creating funds for trying to atone for the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. Are you
mm.
generally in agreement with the kinds of decisions that the Britain Yearly Meeting is making?
I think so. I don't know. I don't know very much about them, I'm afraid. I've been a bit out of the loop the last few years. But what have they been deciding recently?
Well, I'm just thinking
Uh,
about the reparations as an
oh,
example.
sure. Well, I think
So,
they're all done with very good intentions, and I think it is a way of acknowledging that the awful things went on and trying to make something good come out of it, which I think is always a good idea.
yeah.
So I just think it's important that we don't take too much personal guilt on board with that because we didn't do it. You know? We can acknowledge that awful things have happened, and anything that we're doing that is still perpetuating that. Obviously, we can feel responsible and guilty for that. But I think you need to recognize that you are doing some good things as well, and I think that's okay to say that. So yeah.
And as you say, it's well intentioned. I mean, I think
Hmm.
that's one thing that I very much believe is that everything Quakers do is such well intentioned, and sometimes we get things wrong, but
Yeah.
or we don't clarify what we mean by things. But it's certainly well intentioned. Um,
Yeah.
And of course, we're a faith of continuing revelation. So we
Of
believe that
course.
these things do evolve,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
means that we're not stuck in it in
Yeah,
certain ways of thinking.
definitely.
So what are your hopes for the future then? So this video series started from the future of Quakerism.
Hmm.
What do you think about the future of Quakerism in Britain?
Well, my hope is very much that it continues to exist. I hope that we don't die out. I hope that we continue to exist and grow and adapt, because I think adapting is necessary for any religion to survive and keep going. There must have been, thousands of cults and denominations that just don't exist anymore. In fact, there was a very famous one where I live in Bedford called the Panacea Society, which is worth Googling if you have a minute. It's completely bizarre. But yes, I think we need to keep moving forward and evolving. And we're not always going to get it right, but if we can show we're trying to adapt, then I think that's the main thing. And yeah, and I just hope that people will continue to know we exist, and perhaps knowing that we exist will speak to some people and invite them to come and join us and find out what it's all about and see whether it works for them. So I think that's always been my hope for Quakerism, that people will come to it of their own volition and sort of decide if it's for them or not. So yeah,
Mm. Well, thank you very much, Lottie. I mean, that's a
that's
great
all
note
right.
to end on. It's a general welcome, and I hope these videos will do a little bit about, helping with that aim, really. So, thank you very
Sure.
much for your time today.
You're very welcome.